If you look at all the, high achievers, either today or in the past, a lot of them have ADHD. The vast majority of entrepreneurs, there is a persistence, there is a creativity, this attitude of I can, sparkling personality. I'm not scared of failure. Do you know what I mean? And so they invent, they fail, they come back. And so whether it's your Jeff Bezos, your Elon Musk, your creatives like Justin Timberlake, all of them, they all have ADHD. If you can identify that there are all of these incredible things that also come with ADHD and help steer that child in the right direction, I mean, these are the people that change the world.
Hey, welcome to Unlatched Mind. My guest today is Jennifer Faust. Jennifer is the founder of Faust Global Partners. It's a Washington, D.C. based international business, finance, and investment advisory firm. Jennifer's also, has gone through, a personal struggle, a family struggle with ADHD in her family, right? And she's and as a result, she's become super educated on the topic, to the point where she gives talks all the time. In fact, that's how I found her was through, one of my wife's. My wife sat through one of her talks and was just blown away, was super impressed. And she just said, hey, my wife said, hey, you just got to get her on the podcast. This is information that absolutely needs to be shared. And so, and Jennifer's so eloquent and knowledgeable on it. It was obvious as soon as I spoke to her. I said, this is a great topic to share. And I guarantee there'll be plenty of folks that would benefit from the information she's sharing. So anyway, I learned a lot, had a great conversation, and I hope you get a lot out of it. So with that, let's jump in. Jennifer Faust. Jennifer, thank you so much for your time. Seriously, I appreciate, I dug into your work, and I mean, ADHD is the topic, right? I don't know. Obviously I'm a layman in this area. You're obviously not. And I hear ADHD, I hear ADD, it has a context of being a kid, and
right.
It's not I don't know. I come from like an old school background, and we're going to kind of dispel some of these myths, I hope, right? I come from like an old school background. It was like, those kids, that's just pharmaceutical companies, wanting to give kids drugs, and these kids can't sit still. They need a good smack. Obviously, that's not, there's some in the spectrum that fit that category, but I think it's a lot more complicated than that. I'm sure you'd attest to that. So I guess you want to start with telling us your story? I think would serve as an amazing backdrop to the whole thing.
Yeah. Now, well, first of all, thank you, Stan. Thank you so much, Benny, for having me on. This is such an important topic, but in particular, as I know we've talked about, this October is ADHD Awareness Month. And so I think it comes at a very good time in the year, right? We've started school in September. We've gotten into the new routine. Our kids have kind of started to settle in, and teachers are starting to get to know our kids. And this is about the time that I think a lot of parents go to that first parent-teacher conference. And I know we've just recently been there ourselves. And you start to kind of recognize and see how your child is doing. And so I think this is a great time in the academic school year to talk about ADHD, what it is, what it's not, and how it impacts actually so many of our kids. And so this has been a personal journey for us and for my family. Yeah. I have 3 boys, 2 of which have been diagnosed with ADHD in the past couple of years. For us, the journey started, the journey to diagnosis kind of started around first grade. Although if I'm honest with myself as a mother, I think I've saw now in some of these tendencies and some of these issues before that. But it's very difficult to separate what is just a young child and what is something that needs to be, handled in a more concrete way. But it was first one child, and it was first grade. And up until that point, I could just tell that there were some troubles with him having focus and learning and kind of comprehending material. And I kind of chalked it up, and I think teachers did too, to maybe just being a late bloomer, and that kids kind of bloom at different times. And then it was first grade fall around parent teacher conference that I thought there's something not right here, and we need to figure it out. And so we started our journey for that my one child to getting diagnosed and working with our pediatrician, working then with a more diagnostic test and process. And for me, I really had never had much exposure to ADHD. Probably like you, Vinny, I had heard of it,
Right.
knew of it. It was that kid that just couldn't kind of sit still in school. And little did I know there was so much more beyond that. And so I started the journey of, in order for me to help my son, I need to understand it better, and start putting really a team in place.
Now, did you, so two of your three kids, you said. So, I mean, how did you start to have that feeling? Like, I mean, as a mom, you guys have all sorts of intuitions that, I probably couldn't relate to and a lot of others couldn't relate to, but were you comparing his kind of maturity in school compared to others, or like, what was that comparison? I mean, or is it just like, how did you distinguish between what was that aha moment when you just articulated, it's like, something's not right here? Was it a sequence of things? Was it one giant, was it just a building of observations from your perspective?
Right. I think it was a slow building of observations. I had my oldest child does not struggle with ADHD. I kind of did somewhat of a comparison. I know you have to be so careful to compare your kids, but I just kind of felt too, by like first grade, some of these concepts, some of these things should be starting to smooth themselves out. And ADHD does often run in families. And so I knew that there was some of that in our family. And so I was trying to keep my eyes and ears, peeled to some of that. So it was a slow building, but I think, Vinny, what really probably turned the page for me in recognizing that there was a problem and that I needed to do something immediately to address it was how my son was talking about himself and his lack of confidence. And at first grade, he was starting to talk about how he was dumb, how he didn't like himself, that he was sorry. And so it was very clear that it was starting to impact his self-esteem and how he felt about himself. And I thought, okay, this can't continue. This just cannot continue. My understanding is that a child gets kind of confirmed in who they are between the ages of about 8 to 11. They start to set that mental tone for who they are. Am I a good student? Am I going to be successful? Am I loved? Am I smart? Do I have friends? And I did not want that to get into that period of time where his self-esteem was so low that you can't pull up on it. So when I heard that negative self-talk, and then all these other factors on top of it, I knew that I had to do something, and I needed to start this journey to talking with experts, talking with teachers, that I couldn't just leave it alone.
Yeah. So I guess, for the listeners, what is it? I mean, what is it really? I mean, is it easily diagnosable? Is it, do you have to sit and, see psychiatrists for years? Is there a brain scan? What really is it?
Well, and I think that's it. I think one of the challenges to ADHD is that there isn't just an easy pinprick and a blood test, right?
Yeah.
It would be fantastic if it was something that easy, and certainly would be wonderful in the future if science moved in that direction. It really is kind of a combination of factors and kind of unpacking your child, that it's an exploratory process. And so it requires working with pediatricians. It requires, we went to a place here locally in Leesburg called Mindwell Psychology that did a more of an evaluation of them to kind of see where some of their challenges in particular were lying. And so there are multiple ways to kind of attack it, but it really is observation based. And so we had our teachers fill out different forms on, and score them on different metrics such as attention and, focus. I mean, all sorts of things like that. And then you have to kind of collect this data and then come up with a diagnosis of whether or not they have it. And that, I think, is what's challenging. Now, yes, there are brain scans. People have done research and will brain scan an ADHD mind. versus a non-ADHD mind. And there are some differences there, which kind of confirm that ADHD is real, right? It's a complex neurological disorder. And so it's just that for an average person, right, that's not available to us to go and to get a brain scan. And it really requires working with doctors and people that understand that ADHD is real, and that there are some challenges with it, but also if you recognize and understand it, there's some really great things too about having ADHD. And that the earlier you diagnose it, you understand it, the better you can work with your child to help them thrive.
Right. Yeah, identifying the quote unquote problem is the first step in working with it. Now, you said the teachers, is how accepted or how supported is this concept? Is this as quote unquote disorder? And I use those terms loosely. I'll always do the air quotes because I know there's there's landmines, some there, and I don't want to be insensitive, but just for the lack of better terms, this disorder. What would you call it? I guess to set me straight, is a disease. What's the actual word that you most likely use?
And I think that's such a great question. And there's certainly debate about the term, and many people that are experts in this space would say that attention deficit disorder, AD, and hyperactivity disorder doesn't really fit the mold. It used to be that it was, ADD, attention deficit disorder, then it became ADHD. And then now the community is kind of just coalesced around ADHD, although many people will say, ultimately it's challenges in executive functioning, right? That is ultimately some of the problems, and that we should rename it and classify it. If anything, it is not a deficit. The issue is that there's almost an overstimulation, an inability. It's not that they can't focus. It's the fact that they're focusing on so many different things at the exact same time, that there can be a challenge at that particular time to narrow down exactly what they need to focus on. There's a great little saying that people in the community say is that you've got a race car brain with bicycle brakes, or you'll hear a Ferrari brain, but with bicycle brakes. If anything, my ADHD children are over processing, they're overthinking, their life is filled with so many different stimuli and colors that at a young age, they have an inability to kind of they have bicycle brakes to control that Ferrari brain that they have and to slow it down. So it really isn't a deficit, but it is an inability sometimes to control their mind. As they get older, and as we all mature, and with assistance, it does get better.
Yeah. So what I was trying to, I think, get at before, are the schools, is it accepted as, like, generally, I know, I guess every school system would be different, but in general, the school systems, do they recognize it, and are they able to work with parents on this? If you said, hey, I think my child is ADHD, because obviously, someone diagnosed with this, a child diagnosed with being, their home life is affected, their social life's affected, but a lot of it's in school, right? Learning is one of the major, I guess, problems they have to deal with. So I think the teachers and the schooling systems recognizing and working with it, is it becoming standardized as something to work? If a kid had a chronic problem of, I don't know, peeing themselves, the school would obviously, okay, we can't let this happen, and we have protocol, you got to do, whatever. When they're little kids, sometimes that happens, but this is a lot more nuanced and a lot more abstract. So when you started going through this, did you find the schools were ready to go, or? And I guess it's probably micro based on where you are and what school you're in, but what was your experience there?
Yeah. For me, I would say that I had some initial mixed reactions to it. And you're absolutely right. The problem is the fact that there are not easily physical impairments. This isn't like a child in a wheelchair, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so that is the problem. And you see that if there was a student that needed glasses and couldn't see, of course you'd give them glasses. If you had a child in a wheelchair, you build them a ramp. That's one of the challenges. There are physical manifestations of ADHD, right? An inability for the child to maybe sit in the seat, those types of things, blurting out, jumping around, or often in girls, and we can talk about it, it can manifest itself very different in girls, that they're being dreamy and they're not paying attention. So there are physical manifestations of ADHD, but there's not physical impairment. So that is challenging. And I think that can cause some teachers and educators and even parents to not fully understand it. I feel that my family's been very, I think we've been very supportive by our school and by our doctors. I have to say that there are other parents and people that I have run across that maybe haven't been as supportive of what we've gone through, because I don't think they've understood it. And I do a lot nationwide through my virtual community, finding focus. And what's unfortunate, Benny, is that a lot of the people I do talk to do not get that level of support. And in particular, in more diverse and underrepresented communities, such as the African American community, they don't see that. So some teachers, I think, understand it. They want to be supportive and helpful. The reality is there's, I think, a huge educational need for this. About 1 out of every 9 children have ADHD. So as an educator, you're going to be sitting in a classroom where you're probably at least going to have 1 or 2 children that have it, whether it's diagnosed or not. So one of the things I'm really passionate about, and certainly with ADHD Awareness Month, is that people understand more what it is, what it's not. There are a lot of, things that you see at kind of, they call it the ADHD tip of the iceberg, but there's a lot more underneath it too. So my hope is that there's more education that goes on to work with teachers and parents, which is why I try to speak out about it as much as I do.
Yeah. Well, I think that's what like any quote unquote movement, right? Where we need to, shine a light on something that we feel like is a problem. There's really nothing that beats the grassroots movement from the bottom up. What you're doing, and then it becomes, it gets to a certain point and it becomes quote unquote standardized, and then, policies based on it, and then the children are helped from that. So yeah, keep doing what you're doing. I mean, there's no magic bullet, but just constant conversations like this. Hopefully listeners hear this and say, oh crap, at the end, I want to, have you at least let us know where people can find you and what resources are available. But before we get there, I mean, in terms of treatments, I mean, the first thing you think of is, okay, drugs, right? I remember Ritalin and Adderall was, when I was a kid, that was like, they started doing that a lot, and it was very controversial. And I'm hoping there's non-drug treatments as well, but what does the treatment, outlook look like for folks, for kids suffering with this?
Right. So there are kind of, there's drug therapy. And then on the other side, there's behavioral therapy. And then there are people that kind of move, and this is what we've done, is a little bit of a mixture of both. Yeah. The other thing that's challenging with ADHD is it really should be seen as a spectrum. There is not some, every child has a different version of it. Some are more challenged on the hyperactivity side of things. On the other side is inattentive. Then there's combined type, which is in the middle. So there isn't an easy one-size-fits-all solution to helping a child or even an adult that has it. Yeah. Ultimately, it's kind of trial and error and figuring out the degree to which it impacts your life and how can I help, whether it's through behavioral therapy or drug therapy, to get through it. There's a lot of people too that perform more natural ways, whether it's with diet, food, exercise, health supplements. And I've heard people say that they've had great results because of that. Exercise is a wonderful way for people and children with ADHD to help control some of their symptoms.
Get a little tired, right? I mean, it might slow things down a little bit, right? I mean, it sounds simple, but yeah.
It does. And it boosts dopamine. It's that rush that you get from exercising, and that actually the ADHD brain is lower on dopamine. And so it's those types of things that there's a lot of that help tremendously if you have ADHD. And so it's there are many people and many adults that kind of, you could say, self-medicate through caffeine or through lots of exercise. And so they exercise, they have a couple cups of coffee, and that helps them get through the day. The problem I think that you have with children is the fact that is that the educational system that we have here is so geared towards your high functioning student, right? Students that are high executive functioners do really well academically. And I see that even in our own life. My oldest son is a very high executive functioning. He's very organized and detailed and can flow easily between classes and environments and focus, open up and focus up again.
Yeah.
And it's no surprise he does really well in school. And so and this education system has to have a one size fits all answer for that. And often what they call and those are neurotypical children. You'll hear that term often being used. And so you get perhaps kids that don't fit necessarily into that mold. And it's really challenging for them to stay engaged all day. And so I think that's where children often need assistance to get through and to go through classes and school where they're not as stimulated. Boredom is ADHD kids have just a struggle with boredom. The minute something becomes boring to them or uninterested to them, they completely lose their focus on things. That said, when they find something that's incredibly interesting to them, they have an ability like no other to hyper focus. And that's why you see so many of the world's great entrepreneurs, creatives, the common thread overwhelmingly is that they have ADHD. They have found their niche and they can block out everything in the world and they create incredible things.
Well, that's interesting. I wonder, I think what an amazing thing that would be if an ADHD brain is so scattered because it really hasn't found its the thing that it wants to focus on. And when you can, it's like, it's get out of my way, which is because you had mentioned that in a lot of your literature you sent me, and I didn't realize that, but that there's although ADHD folks struggle obviously with what we're talking about, they're also excel in a lot of ways, and they're actually better than their peers in a lot of ways.
Yes.
That's really neat.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's really encouraging. And if you look at all the, high achievers, either today or in the past, a lot of them have ADHD, the vast majority of entrepreneurs. There is a persistence, there is a creativity, this attitude of I can, sparkling personality. I'm not scared of failure. Do you know what I mean? And so they invent, they fail, they come back. And so whether it's your Jeff Bezos, your Elon Musk, your creatives like Justin Timberlake, all of them, they all have ADHD. So it's, they're motivators. And so if you can harness, and this is why I'm so passionate about talking about it, is because I think it's harder as a child to go through that, very neurotypical school system. But if you can identify that there are all of these incredible things that also come with ADHD and help steer that child in the right direction, I mean, these are the people that change the world typically.
Yeah. You have to, and again, at the risk of sounding insensitive, you have to be a little off in some ways to be that successful like some of these folks are, because it doesn't fit the normal mold of waking up, going to work at 9, going home at 5. If you're going to create some of the stuff those folks created that you just mentioned, you got to have something going on and I don't like to say it's wrong, right? It's just a different approach. It's a different way you're motivated and you see the world, and working 4 days straight without sleep is not a normal thing, but a lot of these folks do it. Right. And maybe, there's so it's an interesting dichotomy between the bad and the good there. Right. If you can treat and manage the bad, and these folks can be our future. So, and it's a good way to, I think that helps parents also look at some of the opportunities that what they're struggling with. It might give them a little hope, like, okay, let's get them focused on the right thing. And then who knows, many folks will be working for them in the future.
Absolutely.
That's neat. Now, have you?
And it's,
go ahead.
Yeah, and it's interesting because they do a lot of times, and I don't want to underestimate some of the struggle that parents go through when they're younger.
Yeah.
And I've heard people call this too. It's a long haul kid, right? This is, and it is, and we certainly have had, while we've had ups, we've also had an enormous numbers of downs, and there are struggles through it all. But I think as I've gained greater perspective on what it is, I've accepted more that I have a couple long haul kids that are going to need some additional support.
Yeah.
But if I do that, I have a high degree of confidence that they're going to go off and do really great
Yeah.
things,
Yeah. Yeah.
and excel in whatever their chosen path is.
Mm. Yeah, it seemed like on the autism spectrum, Asperger. I don't think they're saying. I think the DSM dropped Asperger's. I thought I read that, but it's the same thing where there's folks that maybe aren't so good in certain social situations and whatnot. But man, you put them in front of whatever task they're working, and you're just not going to break their spirit. They're going to be a force to be reckoned with. So I think that's it's part of the overall plan apparently. But so I mean, so as you were going through this with your personal story and obviously your desire to spread this message and help others. Have you been hit with folks on the opposing side saying, well, we're making every excuse in the world for kids nowadays. Why don't you, we need to be just more strict. And I mean, I know times are getting better in terms of awareness and people thinking through things a little bit more cerebrally than back in the old days, I would say. But is everyone just accepting of what you're saying, or is there a lot of naysayers, I guess?
Right.
Or both?
I would say that that the majority of the feedback that I've gotten has been very positive. I do think that we're moving more towards an appreciation in society for individual differences, and for accepting. I think we're talking much more about mental health now than what we ever have. Are we all there? Is everybody on board? No. It's unbelievable how, and I read this interesting statistic that on average, it will take somebody 11 years to go to the doctor about a mental health concern versus a sprained ankle is one month, right? You would never think about waiting 11 years to go to an orthopedic surgeon about an issue, right, in your leg or a joint or something. And yet, mental health people have a hard time talking about. So, but it's getting better. I do think with technology and resources, and I think as we move more to try to accept individuals for who they are, it's gotten a bit better. Yeah. Probably the area of, I'd say but one area of, you could say, kind of strife within the ADHD community and understanding, of course, is, do you medicate or do you not medicate your child? That's probably in my work where I hear the most disagreement. And everybody really does need to decide for themselves what they're most comfortable with. Right. We went ahead and took the medication route along with some, trying to incorporate exercise, good sleep, diet, some behavioral therapy things. And we've seen great results through that. And, a lot of people do. I think that the highest degree of success typically isn't just going down one path. It's trying out a few things. Now, the other thing is that, you can go on medication, but you can go off it just as easily too. Right. So there are a lot of parents that are further along in this journey than what I am. We'll talk about that, which said, my son or my daughter went on or off medication, depending upon what they were doing. When they were in high school and grades really mattered and they were really struggling to get through the material, we decided to go on it. Their grades improved, their attitude improved, and we're glad that we did. Now that they're out of college, we're not on it anymore. And so that's our view of medication, is we want to keep all the options open on the table, and we'll kind of continue to reassess depending upon their educational needs and how they grow and they develop. And also, as they get older, social relationships become really important part of their experience growing up. And we want them to have friends. We want them to be able to feel like, they're loved and have a community of people around them.
Yeah, you had mentioned in some of the stuff you had sent me, this is something that most kids outgrow. Is that true?
Well, and so there is, and it's, there's different, I think there's different opinions within the community about the degree to which you outgrow it or not. there is definitely a feeling that as kids get older, that there is a portion of them, around a quarter or so, the number I've heard between 20 and 40%, really outgrow the symptoms. The human mind is not really fully developed, regardless of ADHD, if you're typical or not neurotypical, until you're in your mid-20s.
Yeah.
And so it's your brain continues to develop. There are kids that just bloom at different times. And so, it's around your mid-20s, your brain is kind of considered fully developed. And you kind of can see then the degree to which ADHD is still a part of, kind of your ongoing, your ongoing life. The other thing I think that's interesting to note, and I never kind of considered this until I started on this journey, is kind of looking at a person's age in two ways. One is your chronological age, and one is your executive functioning or your maturity age. And, an ADHD boy or girl is commonly a couple years behind with respect to their executive functioning.
Yeah.
And so you can have a child that is 15 on paper, that chronologically is 15 years old, but their brain development is probably more about 13. And those are the kids that we kind of colloquially say they're the late bloomers. Or boy, you say, my son or daughter isn't ready to drive yet. Right.
Yeah,
they just can't handle it. And there's a difference. And it's around 25 or so where your chronological age and your brain development kind of all come together. Now, ADHD absolutely can continue in adults. Some people will seek assistance, whether it's medical, through drug therapy or behavioral therapy, the rest of their lives. But it's around your mid-20s that you kind of, I think, will understand the degree to which ADHD is going to continue to kind of impact your adult life going forward.
Yeah. And one of the comments I had sent you was, I think on a positive side, like you said, maybe the physical manifestations of what ADHD maybe is probably, maybe it wanes by your 20s or whatever date you had put there. But if folks like you aren't doing what you're doing, you're not attentive to your child's, struggles, and you're not trying to get that help, then there's going to be impacts as they get older, right? Like you were saying earlier, confidence is built. If you miss that, if you don't build that confidence, all the things that maybe, if you weren't troubled with this, I'm just going to call it a disease for the sake, if you're not troubled with it, that maturity trajectory you're on is going to be, here, whatever. People that are just listening, I'm doing my things with my hands. I'm Italian, sorry. You're going to be here, but you're going to have to make that. You're going to have to make that time up in some way, or you might have to, unlearn some things, some of the bad habits with relationships or whatnot, or like your son was saying, some of those, it broke my heart hearing you say that, how he was so down on himself, and it's like, that's a formative time. And if you can't get through that the right way, you're going to come out the other side post-college. There's going to be some residual, you're going to have some work to do there. So yeah. I think,
absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why I think it is so important to get early diagnosis for people to understand what it is, because with the right support, you can get to the other side of that. And that's, Vinny, that's absolutely it.
Yeah.
And the other thing that if you guide your child well through these formidable younger years, and those are formidable years, regardless, again, if you have ADHD or not, is hopefully then in their 20s, you've helped them find things that really stimulate them.
Yeah.
So that's the other thing, right? I mean, the problem too is that when you're in school, you're taking gen ed, you're taking all these classes that some of it you just don't like.
Yeah.
But hopefully in their mid-20s, they have found what they're good at, and they love it, and so and then that's when they shift to that hyper focus mode where they can create and they can really excel.
Yeah.
And so that's how we look. But if you don't get that, I heard some other statistic too, which was just striking, was that some belief that perhaps like something like 30%, 40% of people in US prisons have undiagnosed ADHD. Others. I mean, that's the flip side, right? is it if children aren't, if they don't understand what it is, they're not diagnosed, they're not given that support, that all of a sudden becomes that they're the dumb kid, they're the bad kid. And they start reinforcing that. Maybe they start hanging out then with kids that they shouldn't be hanging out with. And it becomes that fulfilling prophecy of I'm not good, I'm worthless, leave me alone. I'm just dumb, I get in trouble all the time. And that's where you see them start to go down the wrong path. And that's so difficult to unlearn that, to break down that self, to try to rebuild self-esteem. People in the ADHD, other community mothers will say, do anything you can to preserve your child's self-esteem. You can always throw more tutoring at them. If, going to college and having a full semester of classes is just too much, go slower. Take 5-6 years to finish college. Who cares? But slow things down, work with your child. They will get there, but protect their self-esteem and their self-worth, because it's so difficult to unlearn that.
Yeah, it's interesting. My personal experience with that is, talking to the wife way back when my oldest Victor was about to get into kindergarten. He was right on the cusp. We could have held him back. It was like, well, do we just give him another pre-K year, or do we? And my first response is, hell no, get him out there. He's going to learn. I'm not cushioning. Again, it's a very old school way of just get up earlier, work harder, and no excuses. I don't care. Right. That's how my family was. And, I want to take some of the good of that forward, but there's some not so good I want to leave behind. And I'll give my wife all this credit. She, of course she talks to folks like you and others. That's her life. She's a social butterfly, but she's constantly seeking help from others. She's just really, really important, and we didn't understand, we knew that we didn't understand what the answer was. At least I didn't. And I basically yield to her with decisions of the family, because that's where she spends most of her brain cycles. And I'm very, very lucky to have that. So if you're listening, honey, thank you. But you better be listening. No, but like I said, my first response was, no, get him out there. No, we're going to start giving him this. I'd rather him be the small fish in a big pond, so you can, as opposed to the opposite. And really starting to talk to people, I was wrong, 100%, because of what you just said. Like, get them that extra year at those formidable years will enable that confidence. Physical size is big, he'll have more confidence on the playground, mentally. And I just said, wow, thank God I wasn't thank God I yielded to folks smarter than me in this area, because I think, and I've noticed it's monumentally been the right decision, just looking at how he's, because he's a little bit older, just, 8 months, whatever it might be.
Yes.
And it's gone a long way. So that confidence is later in life, you're out of college now. All right, now you should be the dumbest person in the room, because you want to be the small fish in the big pond. So you have that always goal to move up. But formidable years, that's not right.
Absolutely. And it is. And I think just slow things down, try to create an environment which is the most conducive for your child. And I too, to be fair, Vinny, I was like you. And that was the way I was kind of raised. I did very well in school. I'm a high executive functioner. And so certainly for me, my initial reaction was, hey, get it together. Why not push it forward, do it, go for it. And I've had to kind of unpack and unlearn that and realize that attitude maybe in some situations is just fine, but it's not a one size fits all attitude.
Exactly. Yeah.
And when I've started to kind of craft things a little bit better, and even my 2 kids that have ADHD, their cases are different. I cannot treat them the same. But when I kind of stop and say, hey, for one in particular, having too much to do is just too much. Yeah. We try to say you can have one sport and maybe one other thing going on. It's just very, very hard for him to have so much stimulation and so much. He's exhausted. He gets through the day. And so, you know what? He isn't going to be a kid that's in 3 or 4 things, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And the minute I slow it, yes, exactly. I don't need to compare with it.
Yep.
He doesn't need to be in piano and 2 sports and other, we want him to do well in school. And well doesn't have to always mean straight A's. Right. Well is what's the best to his ability and getting the support that he needs. Everybody's different. But I think if your child is really struggling academically, it obviously plays a big part you know what I mean? It hits them hard, self-esteem. So I want them to feel good about their academics and their school. So we've kind of said, let's be very sensible about what we sign up for. COVID's kind of been helpful with because some things were kind of cut off.
Yep.
And we're just going to do it at the pace. And the reality is, we just had parent teacher conference yesterday. They're doing so well, better than what I think anyone we could have imagined. It's because we put in what they call kind of that scaffolding, and we understand our children and better, and we're getting them kind of the support that they need. Again, they're long haul kids. This isn't a quick fix. There's going to be years that the materials that they're going to have to learn perhaps really doesn't interest them, and it's going to be more of a challenge. We get tutoring, we get a lot of support from our wonderful school. But we'll get there. And what's great is the child that had the most, you could say, negative self-talk. It was great to see him look at his grades yesterday because they were all A's. I'll say awesome. That ADHD kids, typically, they're really bright. Yeah. They're really bright, but it's hard for that intelligence to shine through. Yeah. And so after 2 years of kind of working on this for this one particular son, it was great. He's starting to realize that that he's got so many wonderful qualities, and that this hard work is paying off.
Yeah, I was, thinking through some of the discussion topics this morning. I was thinking of an analogy where, say you're a really brilliant mathematician and you got a math test and you're doing a math test. And if you take two people, one with ADHD, one without, the one without ADHD is sitting in a room with a nice little light and takes their math test focused. No one interrupts them. The ADHD brain, it's the equivalent of you're taking a test and people keep kicking the door in, throwing your papers all around, and you got to keep picking it back up, get started, lock the door. They keep knocking the door and flashing the lights on you, and that's what you're battling. So that analogy was rolling through my head, and it was just kind of like, well, that's not fair.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so that's what I think. If you can find some techniques, either through drugs or through behavior, people say that to quiet the mind. It's like I've heard people that are on medication say that they take medication. It's like the fog of their brain goes away. Because there's just so much that's in there, and it quiets the mind and it allows them to focus on what they need to focus, to pick it. Yeah. Otherwise, they're focusing on so many different things. And I can see it with my children that when the medication is more kind of in their system, they're getting all their stuff done. Yeah. And then as it starts to tail off and they get tired, just like we all do, right? Your mind starts getting more cloudy and exhausted, and you're ready for bed. That they're just much more distracted. That fog is kind of coming in. They'll talk about things they read 2 years ago and want to go back to that theme. And then they're talking about their school, and there's so much that's in there, and they have a hard time, again, controlling that race car brain.
Yeah, and I think there's also an undertone of this, talking through this, and I did a podcast with a gentleman a couple months ago now, and it's one of the problems we all have in a society is it's really like society's not set up for us to just do what inspires us. We have to do a lot of stuff that it's not inspiring. If you love math, and you hate reading. I'm just thinking about kids' school. You have to do the reading. Say you're not into phys ed. You have to go to phys ed and climb a rope. And it's not going to be intrinsically inspiring. So you have to have this external, force to just get through it. And I wonder how much of that's at play too, because I've some of the reading I was doing, it's like parents are like, well, my kid can focus on video games and they're like the best at blah, blah, blah. So obviously the brain can do, but it's certainly congruous with what you had said, which is, they're now maybe video games isn't the best example, but if they find something that inspires them and they want to do, they can crush it, so they crush it. It's just an interesting, cause I'm always on this fence about, I maybe someday, right? Cause their schools are set up just to be factories to put people in the assembly lines, right? They're not really, and that's a whole nother conversation. We'll do another podcast on that, but the school systems aren't, cause society doesn't reward oh, you're really inspired. Well, go do your thing. It doesn't have to make money. Well, it does. Like it has to day one or you can't eat, right? So we're stuck in this, system of you got to just do all these things. You got to wake up, go to school. My son and my daughter, they wake up on Saturday mornings on their own. They're ready to go. They love it because they know they can do whatever they want on Saturday morning.
Yes.
Monday morning
Yes.
hits, and there's this air of, and I'm trying to break the household of the Monday through Friday blues. I don't want that. Like, I want to be like, hey, and I'm trying to say to them, hey, it's Monday. Hey, what are you going to do in school today? You excited? All right, what are you going to, you got that spelling to it. We did that spelling, quiz last night. You ready?
Yeah.
Like, just try to get them excited and realize it's not Monday sad, it's Friday's exciting. We don't want that. I mean, every day is supposed to be up and down, and you're supposed to be, that's what I feel like we should be approaching things that way, but it's not quite there yet. I mean, society's not structured that way. It is. Yeah.
It's tough. And that's where this is, it is, there's this really big gray middle to this, because I'm like you too.
Yeah.
I think, I want to recognize that a couple of my kids have some extra challenges that they're going to have to work through. And I certainly want to acknowledge it and support them and have some flexibility. But at some point too, they need to be functioning members of society and adults.
Yeah.
And there are things as adults that you have to do, which are not fun and interesting. And you just got to accept that and do it anyways. Right. And so it is really challenging. We see that too. They will jump at opportunities to do things that are really exciting and fun for them. And then other tasks are really challenging. And so my husband and I we do struggle at that, because it's like, all right, at what point do we kind of give them grace? We know this is hard. Homework is tough for kids with ADHD, unless they just absolutely love that subject. All right, it's tough. At what point, though, do we have to kind of kick them in the pants and say, hey, man, that's life. You got to do things you don't like to do. I don't like doing things. You got to go. Not everything of our job we like. And so that is kind of challenging. Motivation, I think in particular, too, with all kids, but certainly with ADHD kids, is really, really important. Lots of rewards, lots of praise, and that can be exhausting. That's why I use that term. It's a long haul kid. And they have a very difficult time with time management and kind of an understanding of things in time. And so you can't say, well, if you do a great job at the end of the quarter and you get an A on something, I'll give you something. That's way too far. You have to set up all these mini rewards and steps, which are very tangible for them, because they kind of are time blind. They have a hard time connecting events, responses, and outcomes. And you need to bring those together, and you have to work with them, I think, on some of those things, and help them build up and a better understanding of certain actions will lead to certain results. So we do lots of incentives here, lots of, if you do well on your spelling on Friday, you get to go to Five Below, or, you get something. And what's amazing is you see them, they respond, and they're great at it. Lots of things like that. But it is, it's to parents and people that are listening. I get it. It is exhausting. It is exhausting to constantly have to be that one step ahead, and then trying to think about how can I push them through it.
Yeah. Parenting. There's no manual.
It's tough.
Yeah.
There's no
the old cliche.
There's no man.
Yeah. It is exhausting. Yeah. But I mean, what else? I mean, what else are we here to do for our parent? I mean, they're number one. I mean, it's all for them. I mean, it sounds so cliche, and I roll my eyes even saying it, because I remember hearing it so many times, but it's absolutely true.
Right.
So one thing, and this gets a little clinical, I guess, and this is kind of like, I think in my notes I sent you, I was like, okay, this is the devil's advocate part of the conversation, right? And I want to trek through this, and we'll wrap it up here in a minute, but I want to trek through this just a little bit for those folks saying, everyone's got ADHD. Everyone has it, technically. And there's some, I would say it's not an entirely wrong statement to say, well, you can almost look at anyone and say that, right? I mean, I'll tell you some of my stories offline. I mean, my parents, my family, I'm like, wow, I could check a lot of these boxes. So what did I do? Okay, I'm a data geek. So I go back to the American Psychiatric Association, with the AMA's, APA, right? The DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistics Manual. And I didn't know what the heck this thing was that I doing this podcast. So, about a year ago, I started looking into it. It's really neat because it's the backdrop for like the clinical theory of
Right.
what a lot of the clinicians use as the criteria to kind of quantify these things we're talking about. In this case, it's ADHD. So what and of course, there's plenty of websites out there, and there's so much information. You got to kind of cut through it, and who's paying for the, what's the agenda here? Who's
Right.
who's
Yeah.
paying for this article? And but on the flip side, where there's plenty of these MDs saying ADHD is a made up thing. Okay, well, sure. Let's read about why you're saying that. So one of the perspectives they had, and I just want to get your feedback here, is that if you look at the DSM, right? The DSM, it goes through iterations, right? I think it started in 1952, and the DSM-4, revision 4 was I guess published in 1994. Revision 5 was in 2013. Okay, so, I'm hoping, looking at this stuff optimistically, as neuroscience improves, scanning improves, the understanding of the brain, which we don't really know much about at all, I think, in my opinion, compared to we have so much to learn there. But as research gets better, as technology gets better, as overall, medicine and our understanding of the human thing, this machine that's full of stuff, gets better, right? Especially the brain. I would hope that DSM gets updated based on only because we're understanding it better, and there's no agenda there, right? So anyway, I guess what I'm really getting at is from the DSM-4 to DSM-5, the criteria used to diagnose, the criteria used to diagnose someone with ADHD has really opened up, from things to like, first you had to have 6 of the 18 symptoms to be diagnosed. Now it's only 5. First you had to show signs of symptoms before age 7. Now it's age 12. And there's 6 actual. I won't bore everyone with the details, but you can look up the DSM revision 5 if you're a geek like me. But it seems to me that, and again, I'm hoping it's because we're understanding it better. And then folks like that say, wait, no, onset could happen as late as age 11 or 10. So 7 is just too premature. So let's open the aperture up more. But the other side of me is thinking, how much is big pharma involved in this? Now I'm hoping, and this is me being notably skeptical, and admittedly so. First of all, you can't take big pharma out of anything. You can't, because there's
totally,
massive
totally
lobby.
agree. Yeah.
And I just want to throw that on the table, not to in any way discredit any of the stuff that you certainly personally have gone through, and that's not what I mean. I just want to look at the other side of things. Any thoughts there? Folks saying, like, would you? And I don't know, your children, what age were they? Say, I don't even know the ages, but.
Yeah, so the boys are almost 9, and so this was when they were about 7 years old. I mean, I certainly believe that I think diagnosis, and this is just my layman's perspective, not only going through it, but then also just seeing other parents and talking to other parents, is that you can maybe see little symptoms and stuff before. Some people I've talked to say that they have, but I think like first, second, and third is kind of a good time frame that you kind of can start to see. Yeah. Kindergarten kids are coming from different preschools. Yeah, it's true. People people are bloom at different times. Absolutely. Right. But then also when you start getting a first, second, and third, you are able to kind of start to things kind of smooth out, and you're able to see, right, these are characteristics. 8 out of other 10 kids in the class can sit through 30 minutes of math. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Whether they like it or not. My kid can't, or my kid blurts out 5 times a day, where this other kids, typically it's 1 or 2. I mean, you start to see the smoothing out of characteristics, and then you start to see more of the outliers. So I think that to me is just first, second, and third. And it's also good, I think, to address some of that, as we've talked about earlier, is that then you can start putting that scaffolding in place before they starts to impact their self-esteem and their confidence. But I do think that there's a better understanding of it. I think that has helped. Sure, big pharma, I agree with you. Absolutely. You cannot outrule big pharma at all in anything.
Right. It's not unique to this at all.
Absolutely. It's not. And so it used to be that there was, just kind of Ritalin. There was a very small number of drugs that were used for ADHD. It has now expanded considerably. There's lots of different drugs, both stimulants and non-stimulants, that can be used to treat, to be used to treat ADHD from a drug therapy perspective. But then I mentioned too, there's all these other things as well that you can that you can use, which are not, with drugs. It's diets and exercise and supplements and things like that too. So, but I think there's more of an understanding. The other thing that's interesting is I think it always used to be, and it still is, mostly seen as something heavily in boys, but the reality is that it is in girls. And I think there's a recognition that for girls, it can manifest itself very differently. It can be in much more of an inattentiveness, a dreaminess. And so girls often go undiagnosed until later on in life. In fact, many moms that I've spoken with, their ADHD was diagnosed when they were dealing with their children getting diagnosed. And a recognition that, and that was something really interesting to me, was that, high executive functioning, multitasking, right? I mean, that is huge for a mom. And that ability. And so you see some mothers with ADHD really struggle, because now they're not just taking care of themselves or their, a spouse, now they're taking care of children. And all of that management, executive functioning, is really challenging. And of course, then they see it as well in their children. And so I have known many people that have said, I've kind of come to terms with our ADHD, whether it's myself or my husband's, someone will say this to me when we've seen it in our children. It's that self-reflection that goes on. I think it's good to go into this somewhat skeptical. I think you should with anything, and do the homework. As I've kind of gotten to know more and more about ADHD, and then also seen my kids grow up, they got it. They got it. It's clear. They don't process things similarly to everybody else. And they are more your spirited children. They're great kids. They're absolutely thriving. It's a lot of work. But you put in that scaffolding and, they're going to succeed. And the more I talk about it, as I mentioned before, Vinny, I cannot get over, because I work in venture capital, and the number of venture capitalists and founders of companies that I'll say, I'm dealing with this, and they're all raising their hand. They all have it. Oh yeah, I've got it. Yeah. You know what I mean? I've got it. I mean, and some people never get diagnosed. They accept kind of who they are. They learn, they put in their own ways of kind of managing it. They find ways to study. I know some people put noise canceling headphones on. They listen to certain music. They all find their own ways of dealing with it.
Right.
And, and that's ultimately, I think, what you need to do is to understand that you have it, and how are ways I can work with it. But again, that's no different than if your kid needed eyeglasses, right? Or if your kid had, your kid had diabetes, or, your kid had something else. You would identify it and deal with it and put in the scaffolding to make sure that they thrive and succeed in life. And so I think that's what I want to do with having this conversation, is empower people and encourage people to do the same for their ADHD child.
Well, on that note, and I wanted to wrap up kind of with this: folks listening that need help, what are their first steps? What do they do? Can they look you up? What's their best first step?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, the first phone call is probably to your pediatrician. If you're dealing with your teachers, if you're seeing, struggles and problems, go to your pediatrician and start the dialogue. Talk to your school if they have a resource, center. There's, a teacher that perhaps is more understanding and aware of this and other learning challenges. So that to me is a good, first place to start the process of getting that diagnosis and looking and seeing if it is indeed ADHD. There are lots of materials online. I found that exceedingly helpful, but as you kind of mentioned too, there's so much out there that I found it to be somewhat too kind of overwhelming. There are the Attitude magazine is a wonderful parent, resource with lots of different articles. There's an organization called CHADD, CHADD, that is really, really helpful. Earlier this year, I put together this virtual community called Finding Focus. And we meet regularly online on Zoom. And we, as parents and caregivers, kind of share strategies and stories and struggles and successes. And the reason why I did that was I felt like that there was a bit of a missing kind of connection between parents and caregivers that dealt with us on a day-to-day, that some of the best strategies and stories came from other parents, that said these were things that really worked well for me, because it is overwhelming. There's just, and it's medical talk, and you think, all right, what am I going to do? So absolutely, I encourage people to look me up, or my group. It's called Finding Focus. We're on Instagram and also on Facebook. Look up Attitude, look up CHADD. Those are resources. My understanding is that CHADD does have some local chapters where parents get together face to face, that, in a support group kind of a format, although that was kind of cut off because of COVID for a period of time. The other thing is that, not all parts of the country are equal. And so you'll find, of course, that there are better resources in more perhaps developed parts of the country. Places like us here in Loudoun County, there's educated, doctors and groups. I founded Finding Focus too, because I wanted to be able to communicate with that mom in Iowa, or someplace where they don't have access to some of those resources. And so Finding Focus, we've got people really all over the country that kind of come in and out, that listen, that discuss medicines, therapies, things that are working, that are struggling. There are ADHD coaches. There are coaches specifically that have extra certifications in dealing with children and with families and helping them put kind of strategies in place at home and at school. So if you're really struggling, I encourage families to find a local ADHD coach, or now work with somebody online, if possible, to help put some of those things in place as soon as you can.
Well, Jen, thank you so much. Appreciate it. And
thank
send
you,
me that
Vinny.
link.
I appreciate it. I will, absolutely. And send my very best to Wanda, and have a great weekend.
You as well. Thanks so much.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.